This episode of On the Beat is brought to you by Ingles. Shop online with Ingles Curbside Pickup. New curbside stores opening every week. Please welcome Mike Griffith.
Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here, and welcome to this week's Ingles on the Beat show. And as always, we're going to have a special guest the second half of the show. John Clay, columnist from the Lexington Herald, leader, longtime friend, certainly one of the most respected and highly regarded journalists in the country, a guy that's been covering SEC football for 36 years. He's going to tell you where he has Georgia in his AP Top 25 vote. He's going to tell you why Kentucky is confident this year as they come into Sanford Stadium for a 7 p.m. night game under the lights. This is what everybody wanted. The Bulldogs are going to have a showdown atop the SEC East against an undefeated Kentucky team. Believe it or not, Kentucky has started the last 3 out of 6 years undefeated. And we've seen a couple of these Georgia-Kentucky games end up being the de facto SEC East championship. That's not supposed to happen, right? That's supposed to be Florida or Tennessee, but really it's been Kentucky under Mark Stoops. And, you know, it's a team that's built very similar to Georgia in terms of the physicality, the ability to run the ball, the balance, the emphasis on not beating yourself. I think Mark Stoops has done a very good job, and yet still has yet to win an SEC East Division, and 0-10 against the Georgia Bulldogs. We talked earlier today to Kirby Smart about Georgia and the run defense, and he said, you know what? He felt better after watching the film. He was pretty despondent. I think a lot of fans even noticed that Kirby seemed a little down after that game. He takes that personal, and you know, the fact that Auburn was able to run for over 200 yards, that was 65 straight games that the Bulldogs had held opponents under 200 yards rushing. They had to go all the way back to the loss to LSU and Joe Burrow in 2018 in Baton Rouge. Talk about time flying. That was 65 games ago, almost 5 years since we saw Georgia give up 200 yards. And you can say 61 of it came on one play, but that's the way it works. And what about that play? And what about the other quarterback runs? And can Devin Leary run the ball? Can Kentucky present some of the same RPO issues? And how much can Georgia get corrected in 1 week? How much better can the defensive line get? I come from the school of thought that you got what you got on the D-line. And I do think that Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp can do some things to generate pass rush. You saw 3 quarterback sacks against Auburn. That was quite an improvement. Georgia had only had 4 through the first 4 games. So when Georgia wants to bring it, they can. Obviously, they don't want to show any more than they needed to in those first 4 games from a pressure package standpoint. They did bring it out for Auburn. They needed it. They needed to change the momentum more than once. They were down 10-0. They rallied. Very impressive. And, you know, then they had to stop at the 12-yard line, 3rd and 1. You see Smile Munden with his game-high 11 tackles. He makes the stop, 4th and 1. It's JDJ filling that gap off there, a high snap, and turning away Hugh Freeze after Freeze gambled at the Georgia 12-yard line. About a minute and a half, 2 minutes left in the first half. That was a really big play. I don't think enough attention has gone to the Georgia defensive stand there. Albeit they did give up over 200 yards rushing, and we did see Auburn take the lead again in the third quarter after the Oscar Delp fumble. And what can you say about that? It's going to happen. Brock Bowers was there. He said, what do you tell a guy like Oscar Delp after a fumble like that? And Brock said, it happens to the best of us. You can't stay down. It's not the Georgia way. And they didn't. And Kirby was impressed because not only did his team come back from 10-0 on the road, but then they lost the momentum again in the second half, and they came back again after falling behind 17-10. So there's a lot to be said. Words like resiliency, endurance, toughness, these are overused words. But I feel like Georgia has shown you that, even though it's clearly not the team that it was last year, and it was never going to be. It didn't matter if it was Todd Monken or Bill Walsh calling plays. You know, Stetson Bennett said it best at the championship celebration. He said, it's not the X's and the O's, it's the Jimmies and the Joes. And the fact of the matter is there has been some drop-off at the skill positions. Now, the quarterback position is debatable. I thought Stetson's ability to extend plays and certainly his knack for making plays in the clutch. We haven't really seen Carson back tested in that way, but Carson does lack the ability to extend plays like Stetson did. I do think Carson is more consistent and accurate with the ball on a regular basis. Now, all that said, who would you take? I mean, it's an apples and oranges discussion. I think the fact that Stetson is a two-time champion, certainly you give him the edge. But if you just put him in a room and you're evaluating them and you take away all their credentials and you measure them up against one another, well, there's a reason why Todd Monken had Carson Beck ahead of Stetson on the depth chart at one point in 2021. Just turned out that Stetson's moxie was enough to surpass a younger version of Carson Beck. Now that younger version of Carson Beck is now 5 games in. He's come from double digits down twice already in his career. Pretty impressive. Not impressive that they got down double digits, but impressive that they came back from double digits. And we're seeing Ra Thomas and Dominic Lovett, the 2 transfers. They look like they're getting a little bit more in the flow. We saw Ra have 2 third-down conversion catches. That was really big, especially the one down there at the 5-yard line. He had to turn around and look early. Beck was under pressure and took a shot. That was a big throw for Carson Beck. He'd had to throw earlier this year where there was pressure, and he went off his back foot and didn't take the hit, and it was incomplete. And that was bad. That was a step back. This time he hung in the pocket, he took the hit, he delivered the ball on time. Big step forward. Those are the kinds of things that earn a lot of respect from your teammates and your coaches. So I thought this was a big step forward for Carson Beck. Ladd McConkey's return, you cannot underscore that enough. 3 third-down catches for Ladd McConkey. Even though his snaps were limited, he really made them count. I mean, Ladd McConkey makes a difference, folks. He is the best perimeter receiver on the Georgia football team. He is their Christian McCaffrey in the open field. And while Ladd's back has been bad, he is so dangerous. Teams have to give him a cushion because they know that he can absolutely take the top off. We are going to monitor his health all week. Kirby was kind of mum on that. He was asked today, how's Ladd doing? Said he doesn't know yet. Remember, Ladd went to a specialist. This was a disc issue. This wasn't anything that's going to require surgery. This is a very common injury in the NFL, but it's a very painful ailment, and sometimes it requires a lengthy rest period, and that's what Ladd had. He had a couple of weeks where he didn't practice. Then he worked his way back up in practice last week. He was able to play in the game. A lot of third down package for Ladd. We'll see where he's at this week. Big thing is you don't want to lose a guy like that for the season. You know, you can make the argument maybe you need Ladd McConkey to win a national championship. One guy you definitely need to win a national title is Brock Bowers. And I would say that Georgia probably wouldn't have both national titles if not for Brock Bowers. He's that pivotal of a player. Mark Stoops compares him a lot to Gronk, Rob Gronkowski, a guy that he was familiar with at Arizona. I think Brock is his own guy. I think he's into his own throwback legend kind of player. I think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I think 10, 20, 30 years from now, when you point back to this era of Georgia football, I think we're going to talk about Brock Bowers, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter. These are the guys to me that are going to stand the test of time as difference-making players. We'll find out more about Javon Bullard, a guy who also came back from injury. 10 tackles, it was big because you saw that the replacements hadn't been holding up their end of the bargain. Georgia is a very different team with Javon Bullard back there. I think he's key, particularly in a game like this. I think Georgia's ability to come up and run support out of that secondary is going to mean a lot. Ray Davis, very talented running back, went for 280 yards on the Florida defense that thought they were good at run defense. If that name sounds familiar, it's because he was at Vanderbilt before, and he went into the portal and ended up at Kentucky. I know Chip Towers, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, asked Kirby about Ray Davis. And, you know, as much as we see Georgia's backfield and as thin as they are, could Georgia have maybe taken a look? And Kirby's memory on that was kind of fuzzy. So maybe not. It strikes me as a little odd, but you never know. I mean, Georgia kind of has preconceived notions of players they've recruited before that they already have relationships with, and they have a lot of confidence in the players that are in their receiving room, in their running backs room. And I don't think we would be having this discussion if Branson Robinson hadn't gotten injured earlier this year. Maybe, this talk doesn't even happen. So maybe it was debatable that they needed a running back out of the portal. I kind of thought they did, even coming out of spring, but they had a lot of confidence in Branson and Roderick Robinson, and now both of those young men injured. And I think they also thought Andrew Paul would be back, and he's not quite back yet. It's to the point you've got Dylan Bell, the converted receiver, back there making plays, explosive plays. And then on a 3rd and 2, we saw Brock Bowers carry the football. So they had to use Brock Bowers as a fullback. So that backfield is very thin. I tell people this, and I've seen there's been a lot of conjecture and opinion since this last game about, oh my gosh, Georgia and it's the coordinator, it's the quarterback, it's this, it's that. Listen, this is a different team than last year. I don't know how many times it needs to be said. Kirby Smart has said several times over, this is a different team. This is a team that has to get better. This is a team that's not what last year's was. Kirby told you. They don't have trained wreckers and havoc makers on the interior defensive line. I mean, Jalen Carter's not coming out of that tunnel. Neither is Jordan Davis or Devontae White or Nolan Smith. And the guys that are replacing them, they're not as good. They're just not as good. It's not to say they're not good. It's not to say that they're not capable. It's not to say that this isn't still one of the best defensive lines in the country, but it's not what it was. What it was special. And to just assume somebody's just going to step into those shoes at every position, that's just not realistic. That just doesn't happen anywhere. Oscar Delp's coming along. He's not Darnell Washington. He's never going to be, unless he grows into 6'7.5" and 280 pounds. And that's probably not going to happen, okay? There's no Kenny McIntosh in the backfield. Easily the most underappreciated, undervalued guy in the league last year. This guy went over 1,000 yards and didn't drop a pass his whole career. But we were all too busy, telling the walk-on story to pay attention and say, wow, they got some really good supporting cast around these guys. So you didn't see that special on Kenny. You didn't see enough made out of Darnell. Maybe Donnie Mitchell didn't get enough attention, right? And Ladd, thank goodness, is finally getting attention. It wasn't about those guys last year, even though it probably should have been. And now you're finding out what was missing. Because the guys that are trying to fill those shoes, they haven't been able to do it yet. They're getting better week to week. The schedule was a godsend. But Georgia also needed a wake-up call. And if Auburn didn't deliver it, I don't know what will. Because Auburn kicked the tar out of them, physically in the trenches. They won at the line of scrimmage. It's been a long time since we've said another team has won at the line of scrimmage. You can make an argument that Ohio State might have had an advantage or held their own, but it just doesn't happen too often. Now, is it a matter of effort? I know Tate Ratledge told us earlier today he thinks it's all mental for the offensive line. I think the offensive line has been adequate. I don't think they've cost you any games. I don't think that they've performed like the best O-line in the country either. I think there's room for growth as, they get into sync. They had to replace some players too. They lost the first-round left tackle in Broderick Jones. And Ernest Green III is just now getting his feet wet as a starter. It's going to take some time. So this is a litmus test, though. Kentucky's going to be physical. They're going to try to knock Georgia off the ball. Georgia doesn't have any excuses. There shouldn't be any element of surprise. They've got the home field crowd on their side. They've performed well in these situations. Kentucky can run the ball, but their quarterback can't run the ball. And I guess my thought is sometimes Kirby's defenses have been a little susceptible to running quarterbacks, whether we're talking about at Georgia or at Alabama. I don't think that's the kind of run game that Kentucky brings. I think it's more conventional, and I think Georgia can stop this. My question is, what does the Georgia offense do? Can Georgia establish the run? Can they get into the play-action game? And I've got zero problems with Carson Beck. I want to be clear on that. I think he's performed fine. My question is, do you have a good enough supporting cast to play this style of quarterback, the distributor? Or do you need the runner? Because the runner's like bringing an extra guy out there. Remember the JT Daniels, Stetson Bennett discussion was as much about the injuries to the wide receivers as it was to the quarterbacks. Because they didn't have a lot of wide receivers healthy, Kirby Smart said it's hard to go 4 wide when you've only got 6 healthy receivers on the whole team, right? And this year's receiving corps has been kind of banged up. And how explosive are they? Could there be a package eventually for Brock Vandagriff? You see how he's able to run the ball and throw it. How does that evolve, right? So Georgia has answers. Georgia's got some weapons, some tools in the toolbox, offensively and defensively. This is a team that's going to grow and evolve as the season progresses. And as long as they're winning, it doesn't really matter. But make no mistake about it, this Big Blue Kentucky team is a threat. And they're coming here confident. And they're coming here with momentum because they absolutely rolled Florida. I mean, there was no ifs, ands, or buts about that game. That was one of the most dominant Kentucky wins. And it's the first time going back from 1948 to 51 when Paul Bear Bryant was head coaching Kentucky that Kentucky has beaten Florida 3 times in a row. And can you believe this stat now? Florida has lost 8 consecutive SEC East Division games outside of Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. You got to go back to 2020, the last time that Florida won on the road against an SEC East team. All right. It's just Billy Napier could be in big trouble. We're going to find out what happens to the Florida Gators. The South Carolina-Tennessee game, very interesting. Big win for Tennessee. Tennessee fans were really letting Spencer Rattler have it. And Rattler said after the game, hey, if you don't got haters, you're not popping. He said it was like Tennessee's Super Bowl. Props to them. So Tennessee won the game, but I think Rattler might have won the war of words there. And to put it into perspective, South Carolina cost Tennessee a college football playoff spot last year. They knocked Tennessee out of the playoffs, essentially. And they knocked Clemson out of the playoffs. South Carolina is it's an interesting team. And we'll see what happens when they play Florida. That's going to be a very interesting game this year. Another big game to watch this weekend, Alabama goes to Texas A&M. The Tide opened as a 4-point favorite. Check that game out. Keep one eye on that 3:30 CBS game while you're tailgating, or turn it on the radio while you're driving to the game. That's going to be a very important game in the West. If A&M wins, it brings Ole Miss potentially back into the picture. Ole Miss beating LSU last week. That West is a jungle. Very difficult division. Looks to me like Alabama's got the upper hand, but they're going to have to take advantage, win on the road at A&M. Meantime, Kirby Smart's telling his guys, one play at a time, one moment at a time, one game at a time. Saturday night, Sanford Stadium, under the lights. We're going to take a break right now. I'm going to recognize my sponsor, Ingles. Appreciate everything Ingles does for us with the show each Monday night, and what they do for you every day at their supermarkets. We can count on Ingles when we come back from the break. John Clay of the Lexington Herald Leader joins the program.
Did you know that Ingles sells more organics than any other store? Or that they run their own dairy? Or that they only serve USDA choice and prime meat? Did you know that they have more local craft beer than any place else? Or that they have Energy Smart stores? Or that they professionally slice and package imported cheese from Europe? Did you know about their giant international aisle, local farm partnerships, curbside pickup, wine department? Or that they donate 3,956 meals a day to local food banks? Well, now you do. It's all in the bag. Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
We're talking to John Clay of the Lexington Herald Leader. And John, we really do appreciate you joining us today. About Devin Leary, the quarterback, what do we think about his game? There was so much hype about him coming from NC State. Obviously, Kentucky's had great quarterbacks before. Will Levis, very special talent. How would you compare him to Levis, and what are some of his strengths and weaknesses?
He's a different quarterback than Levis. He's more of a precision quarterback. He doesn't have quite as strong an arm as Will had, not as big physically as Will. Been a little disappointed so far, and he's the first one to say that. He's under 60% in his completion percentage. He threw a couple of interceptions at Vanderbilt. He's got a new offensive coordinator in Liam Cohen. He's coming off an injury. He hadn't played since October when he got hurt at North Carolina State, had a fairly complicated surgery on a torn pectoral muscle. He's got new receivers. So it really hasn't come all together for him yet, but they feel like, the talent's there. They're really happy and pleased with him, with the leadership with the team and what he's done. He just hasn't put it all together yet.
Yeah, it takes a lot to put it all together. Obviously, though, Kentucky off to a 5-0 start. John, you have been a columnist for a long time. 2000, as we were talking about before. So I'm going to take you away from Kentucky. I'm going to get you out of the Bluegrass State. And I want to ask you a little bit about the SEC, because Billy Napier is a guy, there's been a lot of talk. Billy Napier has a $31 million buyout. And if you ask anybody at Florida that are drinking the Gatorade, I guess we would say, they're saying there's no way this guy gets fired. 31 million is too much. They've got complete confidence in Billy Napier. Is there a way that he could be fired this year, do you think?
Well, I mean, it depends on the rest of the season, but obviously, he's losing twice to Kentucky doesn't help as far as his confidence with Florida fans. Obviously, the win over Tennessee was a big win, but they've not been very good at all on the road. I think they're 1-7 away from Gainesville under Billy. It looks like it's going to take him some time to get things together. Will Scott Strickland and the Florida people give him time? We'll see. I know Scott wants to give him time to build it, but sometimes, it gets a situation where it kind of spirals out of control and you have no choice. I don't think they're to that point yet at Florida. But it's been a while since we've seen, I don't know if I've ever seen where Florida and Kentucky played, and Kentucky was by far the more physical team and really beat Florida up. I mean, Billy said that after the game on Saturday. So we'll see how the rest of the season goes, but that was definitely had to be a wake-up call and very disappointing for Florida fans on Saturday.
Jump over to the West with me. And, we're used to Alabama winning the West, and it looks like right now they're the best team in the West. I thought LSU might be the biggest challenger. Maybe they still will. Alabama plays at Texas A&M. Ole Miss lurking after the home win over LSU. Sort out the West from your perspective for me.
To me, Alabama looks like they've gotten back to the way Alabama used to be under Nick Saban, playing really good defense, running the ball. They kind of found their identity finally after that when they went down to South Florida after getting beat by Texas and came back and played well against Ole Miss. LSU is so interesting. I thought LSU would be really good, but their defense has been terrible. Matt House, former UK defensive coordinator, is their defensive coordinator. I even saw some stuff last week about the Matt House's name had come up for the Michigan State job up at Michigan State. Now you wonder if he's going to make it to the end of the season. I saw where they brought back Pete Jenkins, who's like a legendary coach at LSU as an analyst, legendary defensive line coach. So they definitely have got things straightened out. Texas A&M took that loss early to Miami, but I thought all along, no Bobby Petrino from his days at Louisville. Whatever you think of Bobby, he's a heck of an offensive coach. I thought all along he'd be a good hire for Jimbo Fisher. I think before it's all said and done, obviously a big game against Alabama on Saturday. But I thought all along Texas A&M's got the talent, and I think Bobby's the type of coach to get the most out of that offense. They're a dangerous team, in my opinion.
Yeah, Bobby Petrino, Hugh Freeze, say what you want, like you said, John, but both of those guys clearly excellent football coaches. Now you're a voter. You've been a voter many, many years, many times. Certainly a very well-respected journalist. What does your poll look like these days? Tell me about your give me your top 5 teams.
I'm still voting Georgia #1 until somebody beats them. I think they own the throne. The top 5, I've gone back and forth. Obviously, Michigan, Florida State, Texas, Ohio State. They're all in there in my top 5. I got an eye on Washington. They are so good offensively. How they'll do the rest of the year. I think I voted Kentucky 21, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have it in front of me. They're 20. This was the first week that I put Kentucky in the poll. I also put Louisville in the poll at 25. Jeff Brom's got Louisville off to 5. We got 2 teams here, Mike, in Kentucky that are off to 5-0 starts. I thought Jeff would do a good job at Louisville, and he has. So it's funny, when Jeff got the Louisville job, we asked Mark Stoops, what do you think about that? And Mark said, I hate it.
Yeah, I can understand why Kentucky keeps an eye on Louisville. As you said, Jeff Brom, a guy who's getting things done. It's kind of unique, these out-of-conference rivalries. Georgia has the same issue with Georgia Tech. I'm not sure it's a good idea for those games to be played at the end of the year, John. Is there much discussion on the timing of that game? And especially now that we're seeing the SEC go to an 8, what happens if it goes to a 9-game schedule? Do they keep Louisville on the schedule? Is there talk about moving when that game is played?
Yeah, Kentucky used to play Louisville the first game of the year, and that, got a lot of people talking about football during the summer. Then they moved it, to the end here recently. I mean, it's been a good game at the end of the year. I preferred it at the beginning of the year, but I can see why the coaches don't want to play it then. There's a lot of talk that if they do go to 9 games, Kentucky may drop Louisville. Mitch Barnhart, the UK AD, is very much in favor of keeping it 8 games. He's kind of led the charge to keep it at 8 games. If they keep it at 8, they'll continue to play Louisville. If it goes to 9, I wonder about the rivalry, and I'd hate to see it go away.
Very interesting. You mentioned earlier that you had Georgia ranked #1. When you look at this Georgia team, and we've seen them up close for 5 games, how does it look from afar? When because here in Athens, we're kind of like, this isn't last year's group. This is a different looking Georgia, yet you still have them #1. Tell me about the personality that you see from 10,000 feet.
Well, I mean, obviously Kirby's done a great job in recruiting, and it seems to me they're kind of in a changing of the guard, new quarterback with Carson Beck, some new personnel on both defense and offense. They still got Brock Bowers. Mark Stoops today went on and on about Brock Bowers. He said he was at Arizona when Gronk was at Arizona. And, he doesn't like to compare the two, but they're both those types of players. I still think Georgia's good. I mean, I think they seem to be a little more vulnerable than they've been in the past couple of years, but that doesn't mean that they're going to lose. And I still think, when tested, they've shown against South Carolina and Auburn, they were able to come back and win. So, we'll see how it plays out. I still think Georgia is Georgia, even though they have not looked as impressive as they have the past couple of years.
Yeah, certainly not yet, John. You're always impressive. Always appreciate the time that you give me. Back in the days when I got to edit some of your copy, the cleanest writer on the staff. I worked really hard to find typos and mistakes and couldn't find any, and I don't think you misspoke once this entire interview. So appreciate the verbiage there, both spoken and written. John Clay from the Lexington Herald Leader. That's going to do it for today's show. I want to thank John for joining us. I want to thank our producer, Michael Carvel. Don't forget, every day at 10 a.m., it's DawgNation Daily with Brandon Adams. And, of course, Jeff Sentell Before the Hedges on Wednesday night. And Counter and Coverage on Sundays. Kaylee Manziel now with our happy hour show on Thursday nights from Marlowe's, and our tailgater show from Jimmy Jittery Joe's on Saturdays before the game. Have a great week, everybody.